So the process is very similar to that of creating a user. So we go to the user groups. So here I have created a sample user group. If you see, it's an IT group, IT-group. And this group, there is one user, sample user. So previously created user, I've just pushed him to this IT group. And then I attach a policy, right? So the attach a policy, it can be any policy. It can be a customer managed policy can be attached. It can be an AWS managed policy. Any policy can be attached to this group. So here in the last screenshot, if you see, right, there's a sample customer policy. Here I've just slightly modified the previous policies in such a way that I've just removed the condition. I don't want to constrain by giving an IP address, since it's a group, right? Groups of users can come from different IPs. So I just removed the condition parameter, and I've given access to all the S3 buckets in my account, right? In the existing account, all the S3 buckets can be accessed. So in the resource section, if you see, there is a wildcard star. This means all the S3 buckets can be accessed. And in the action, you see S3 colon wildcard or the star, which means all actions can be done on an S3 bucket, right? On any S3 buckets within that AWS account. So this particular policy is attached to the group. So within the group, this particular sample user who's there can access any number of S3 buckets and can do any actions on this S3 bucket. So that is what this policy means. So we know how to create user and group and attach policy. So we'll go one step deeper. How do we use this, right? How do we use this particular IAM user that we created, right? So say we have an EC2 instance, we want to run some automation scripts, and the script needs authentication, right? It needs credentials to access the AWS resources. So what we do, the way we can configure is you can either consume EC2 instance, or even you can do it in your own laptop or a workstation, your personal workstation, right? All you have to do is install AWS CLI, right? Install AWS CLI. Once it is done, just run this command, AWS configure, the first line, AWS configure, and you will be prompted for set of values, right? So those values are nothing but access key ID and secret access key. So if you remember, when we created a user, right, we had an option known as programmatic access key. Once we checked that, in the final step, we did have the access key ID and the secret access key presented in a web console, right? So those are the keys that you have to input here, the access key ID and the secret access key. And then the region can be default, or if you're working on a specific region like North Virginia region or Ohio region, or in India, Mumbai region, right? AWS supported regions, you can specify those. And also format. So JSON format is something very easier to interpret. On top of it, you can also have a normal table format as well, or YAML format as well. So these are the three formats that are supported: JSON, YAML, and table formats. And once you have done with the configuring your access key ID and secret access key, the next step is, where is it stored within my machine, right? Where is it stored in my laptop or EC2 instance? Where is it? So the configured credentials will be stored under hidden directory, right? If you go to .aws, right, you'll be able to see two files, config and credentials. And if you read or cat into the credentials file, you'll be able to see the access key ID and the secret access key, which you configured in the previous step, right? So yes, we are done with setting up all the credentials. So let's test it out, right? So using the AWS CLI, right, there is a command. If you want to list out the contents of an S3 bucket, or list out the S3 buckets, list of S3 buckets, we can use those commands. So here I'm showing a command known as AWS S3 ls, which basically means listing out the S3 buckets in my account. So if you remember previously, in the last third screenshot in the policies, I have mentioned resource as star, action as S3 star. So basically it means I'm giving full access to S3 bucket in my account. So here, if you correlate here, when I list it out, when I execute this command, basically asking AWS to list out S3 buckets that are there in my account. So it listed out all the buckets, right? One of the bucket, if you remember, it was block.trivikram.pk. So I've just obfuscated here or masked it. So these are the buckets that are present in my account as of now. So this is the way we programmatically access a particular S3 resource, right? So one of the use cases I can talk in a very short time is, say you have written an application and your database is in the cloud. Say you're leveraging an RDS, right? And also some of the service that you're leveraging in is S3. So there are objects in S3 that you want to use in your automation. Also, you want to write into DB RDS database, or read the RDS database. So this is the way we do. The way we do is, for that particular user or a service account, we write a policy that will allow access to RDS, full access to RDS, as well as full access to S3, right? And attach that policy to that user. And then what the user does is he basically downloads the access key and secret key, right? And uses that in his automation script or in his application. And he can call API specific to S3 service and RDS and start consuming the contents in the database as well as S3 for his application. So this is how we do it. So, couple of observations here. For an IAM user and group, right? From security perspective, there is a kind of, we can call a vulnerability. I wouldn't say vulnerability, but there is a big security concern, right? If I run any automation in cloud, right, in any EC2 instance or any Kubernetes or any container environment, I have to hard code the access key and the secret key, right? Which is bad. The reason why I'm saying this bad is, if tomorrow somehow an hacker or an adversary outside somehow compromises our instance, EC2 instance or a container or any EKS cluster, right? In that case, he will be able to read the credentials, the access key ID and the secret key, which is not recommended, right? So that is a big problem, a security concern. And this is particularly not recommended for production. If you're running a production system, no way it should be it should be hard coded. It shouldn't be hard coded at all, right? So for this purpose, we have IAM role, right? So users and groups, we understand, we hard code the credentials and consume the AWS resources and data, right? Or the objects. But in production systems, we don't want the credentials to be hard coded, right? To solve this purpose, there comes something known as IAM role, right? So IAM role, that is what initially, as I told, IAM role is specifically for systems to communicate, right? Inter-system communication. One system in AWS can communicate to another system or another service. So how does how the production systems can communicate to services, right? And resources. So in IAM role, right, we can grant roles for a couple of use cases, right? One is same account access. Say within the same AWS account, right? If some set of users or some set of groups or some EC2 instances wants to access a resource within the same account, I can use IAM role. Say what if there is two AWS accounts, account A and account B, completely different accounts, right? Say account A is handled in India, account B is handled in US, right? Just for the assumption, just for a scenario. In that case, we can also do cross-account resource access, right? So for both same account as well as cross-account access, we can leverage IAM role. And most of the services, based on my working experience, most of the AWS services support IAM role, right? EC2 instances, if you want to run a simple job, a very short time job, 10 to 15 minutes job, we can leverage Lambda functions, and IAM role supports Lambda functions. If you have Kubernetes cluster, IAM role is supported. If you have Docker containers running, you can leverage IAM role as well. So here in the bottom screenshot, you can see what are the trusted entities that IAM role supports. So this is one more key concept that I want you guys to focus. So initially, as so far, we have seen only policies. So those policies are nothing but permission policy, right? Those policies are nothing but permission policy. But now in IAM role, including permission policy, there comes another policy, that is trusted entity policy, right? Trusted entity policy. So trusted entity policy is nothing but it is trusting something, right? I can basically I can trust I can trust a resource, can be a EC2, Lambda, or any service, or I can trust another account itself, account B, right? Or account C, or different accounts. Or we also have advanced concepts like federation and other accounts of other concepts, which I don't want to go. So basically, IAM role will help us help these services and resources to access other services. So, right. So as I mentioned, IAM role has two policies: permission policy and trust policy. Permissions policy is similar to JSON, similar to the policy which you saw. It's in the JSON format, and we define what are the services that are permitted to access and what actions can be done, right? And trusted policy is also a JSON document. It's a JSON policy where we just define something known as principle, right? There is something known as principle. Principle is nothing but who can access, right? So far in the policies, what we have seen is what can be accessed, what actions can be done, right? Now comes something known as within the trust policy, who can access, right? Who can access are nothing but principle, who I can trust. So that is the reason this particular policy is termed as trust policy, right? A trust policy is a necessary resource, right? It is a necessary resource that has to be in the role for it to work, right? So let us go to the next. Yeah. So here we'll go through a couple of scenarios here for IAM role for better understanding. So the first scenario is within the same account. So this is happening within a single account where I want one of my EC2 instance, one of the EC2 instance to access an S3 bucket within the same account. So the way I would go about setting up a role for this is I'll go to create role. So I'll select the first option, AWS service, right? And below you'll get a list of services. So basically the list of services which you see, EC2, Lambda, API Gateway, AWS Backup, Chatbot, so many services, right? This service supports IAM role, right? So here our use cases, we want to grant or trust EC2 to access S3. So first one is you have to select who you trust. So here I trust EC2. So I select EC2, right, in the first screenshot. And in the next screenshot, if you click on next, you'll be taken to the second one where you attach the policies, right? You attach policies. So here I want the EC2 instance to access all my S3 buckets within the account, right? Within the same account. So the policy that I select is AWS S3 full access. This is a AWS managed policy. Basically, this policy will grant access to all the S3 buckets within the same account, right? So I have selected this. Then we create a role. So we just give a name to that role and then just click on create role. So now we have a role that has two things. One is whom I trust and what is allowed for the trusted entity, right? In this case, we are trusting EC2 instance and we are trusting EC2 instance to give only, access to S3 buckets. So that is what this particular IAM role is about. So now we have created an IAM role. We have a good understanding of how to go about creating IAM role. So how do I consume now, right? How do I consume in my automation, right? Or even for some other user, right, within the account. So here from the JSON perspective, right? So this is how the policy look like. So here I showed it in the web console perspective, but if you're a programmer, you want to see from the JSON perspective. So this is how it looks like. So here the first one is a permission policy that we created where we are trusting all the services, all the S3 buckets and all actions or API calls with on the S3 bucket. The second trust policy talks about who do you trust. So in the trust policy screenshot, right, there is something known as principle. Principle, as I mentioned, is something who you trust. So under the principle, there is something known as service, and within service, you mention what service you trust. Here in this scenario, we're trusting EC2 instances. So that is the reason this particular entry is there, ec2.amazonaws.com. If it's an S3, if you're trusting an S3, then there will be a s3.amazonaws.com. If it's a Lambda, then it's a lambda.amazonaws.com. So this is how the permission and trust policy will look like. Now it's time to consume that. we have the IAM role. It's time to consume that role. So the way we consume this role is, um, we'll just follow the simple step. We launch an EC2 instance, and during the launching process, right, we attach the role. Here, if you see, during the instance, we select all the which VPC, what are the subnets we want to host, all those things. On top of it, there is a section known as IAM role. So here I have selected EC2 S3 role. So this particular role was created. If you see here, right, a couple of slides before, we have created EC2 S3 role. So this role is attached to the instance, right? So once I create the EC2 instance, right, that's it. We have the particular EC2 instance have access to that S3 bucket. And similarly, what if I have created an EC2 instance, but I have not attached a role, right? Even in that scenario, to existing EC2 machines that have no roles attached, we can attach as well. So all we have to do is go to instance and click on modify IAM role and attach, right? So here we can see our role, EC2-S3-role. So this is attached. So now we can see how do we access, right? In the screenshot, if you observe, right, I've run the same command. I have not configured any credentials in the EC2 machine. If you remember, I have not entered any access key or the secret key, right? All I do is go in there and type AWS S3 list. Give me the list of S3 buckets in the account, and it lists out. And similarly, the second command I run is I go to a specific bucket, that is blog.trivikram.tk, and then ask the AWS to list out the objects or the files in that bucket, and it inputs, right? It basically outputs, or it displays saying what are the buckets that are there, and it can do all actions like copy, download, write, everything, right? How does this happen, right? When it came to IAS user and group, we remember we hard coded the credentials, the secret key and access key. But here in this case, there was nothing there, right? We didn't do any hard coding things, but still we are able to access. So this is possible because of something known as STS, right? In IAM role, STS is a key concept, secure token service. So this is linked with the trustee. So if you go over this, right, so the STS service basically gives a temporary access by generating a temporary credential, right? It's a temporary credential, not a access. It's a temporary credential it generates, and to the trusted users. So if you see, this is a trusted user. So in our IAM role, we are trusting EC2 instance. So for the EC2 instance, it trusts and generates a credential to access S3 buckets, right? This works very similar to the access key and secret key, which we hard coded, right? Only thing is, every now and then the credentials will expire and it will regenerate again the credentials, right? And these credentials are stored in a safest place. There is something known as 169.254.169.254 IP address, which is something, it's a service that is available only within the VPC, and it is only accessible within the EC2 instance or the machine, right? Outside it cannot be accessed. So using that, it basically gets access to this temporary key. So we'll go over that in some time. So now we generate a key, right? So basically it generates a key. What we understand is IAM role generates a temporary keys, right? This key can be configurable to any time. It can be configured for as low as 15 minutes or can be configured for hours, right? Say I want to give access for 3 hours, right? I want to generate credentials for that can be accessible for 3 hours. You can do that as well. So once the credential expires, right, I can again generate AWS assume, right? Assume command or within the CLI, and I can basically, it again regenerates a different new set of credentials and I'll start using it. So that's how this works. So this is something it happens automatically, right? So this is how IAM role works. So there is a user in account A. So we'll assume this is the second scenario. There is a user in account A, and in account B, there are services, right? The user wants to access either it can be S3 bucket or EC2 instance in account B. So this user needs access to resources in the account B. So basically, the way we do it is in account B, right? In account B, we create a role. We create a role trusting the account A. right? In account B, we create a role, we create a policy first. We create a policy, and within the role, we trust the particular account. So if you remember some time ago, yeah, here the screenshot. So if you see here, in the scenario, there is two accounts, account A and B. Account A is InfoSec personal, and account B is DevSecOps personal. Two different accounts. Say here, EC2 instance in account B, right? Account B, that is DevSecOps personal, wants to access S3 buckets in account A. In this case, the way I would create a role is, in the create role, initially we consumed AWS service, the first option, but rather now, since it's a different account, cross account, right? Two different accounts. So we select another AWS account, right? And then we enter the account ID, right? So here we trust this account ID, right? So EC2 instance in account B wants to access S3 buckets in account A. So we trust this account B, and we use this account AWS account number of account B here. So basically from account A, I am trusting account B, right?